You probably believe that movies about knights, gladiators, or medieval battles give you a good idea of how soldiers really fought in the past. But here's the truth. If you stepped onto a real battlefield, you wouldn't survive for long. The reality of ancient and medieval combat was nothing like what Hollywood has been feeding us for years. The film industry has taught us to expect flashy duels, noble charges, and dramatic last stands. But the truth is far more chaotic, frightening, and often less glamorous than anything you've ever seen on screen. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and reveal how warfare really looked in the ancient and medieval world. By the end, you'll never look at a war movie the same way again. Let's begin with the most obvious myth: the idea of the lone hero. On screen, we often see individual warriors breaking away from the chaos, engaging in spectacular one-on-one fights while the battle rages around them. But in real history, battles weren't built around individual heroics. They were about formations, coordination, and collective discipline. Take ancient Greece, for example. The phalanx formation wasn't just a military tactic, it was survival. Hoplites stood shoulder to shoulder, shields locked together, spears pointing forward in an impenetrable wall. Imagine hundreds of men pressed so tightly that their shields overlapped, their spears forming a hedge of deadly points. If you broke formation to fight heroically, you were as good as dead. In reality, ancient battles were less about skillful swordplay and more about endurance, morale, and holding the line. Soldiers weren't fighting cinematic duels. They were pushing, shoving, and trying not to collapse from exhaustion while their comrades pressed in around them. Movies often show Greeks or Romans running into battle swinging their weapons wildly. But here's the truth. The phalanx was not about dramatic moves, it was about raw pressure. When two phalanxes clashed, it became a massive pushing contest. The men in the rear ranks literally shoved forward, adding weight and momentum, crushing the soldiers in front against the enemy line. Now imagine what it was like to be in that front rank. You could barely see through the slit in your bronze helmet. The sound of metal clashing, men screaming, and shields grinding together was deafening. Your left arm was burning from holding a shield that weighed 15 pounds. Your legs were trembling with fatigue. The man next to you might panic, and if he did, the entire formation could collapse. And here's something that might surprise you. Most battles weren't decided by killing every enemy soldier. They were often won when one side simply broke formation and fled. Fear was the deadliest weapon on the battlefield. Fast forward 1,000 years, and the same myths still haunt our view of medieval combat. Films love to show knights riding alone into battle, clashing swords in noble duels. But in reality, medieval warfare was still about formations and teamwork. Knights were powerful, yes, but they were only effective when used in coordination. Cavalry charges weren't random, glorious attacks. They were carefully timed and organized. Hundreds of armored men on massive war horses thundered forward together. Often only after archers or infantry had already weakened the enemy line. The ground would literally shake, the sound would be overwhelming, and the sight of charging cavalry could cause inexperienced troops to break ranks in panic. But if the knights broke formation and rode in alone, they were easy targets. Discipline, not cinematic bravado, decided who lived or died. Another myth. the lone archer picking off enemies with deadly precision. Movies love to show this, but in reality, archers fought in groups, launching massive volleys of arrows designed to overwhelm the enemy. The English longbowmen, for instance, didn't fire randomly. They used carefully coordinated volleys to break enemy formations. At battles like Agincourt, they planted sharpened wooden stakes in the ground to protect themselves from cavalry, then unleashed wave after wave of arrows to devastate their opponents. This wasn't glamorous dueling. It was coordinated, strategic, and often devastatingly effective. Archers weren't expected to hit individual targets with precision. They were expected to disrupt enemy lines and create chaos. Here's something Hollywood almost never shows. Most medieval battles weren't even decided on the battlefield. They were won or lost through logistics, morale, and disease. Armies were hard to feed. If supply lines broke, soldiers starved. Disease spread quickly in crowded camps, and more men died from sickness than from sword wounds. Dysentery, hunger, and exhaustion killed countless soldiers before they ever saw combat. Siege warfare was also far more common than the dramatic pitched battles movies love to show. Armies spent months digging trenches, building siege engines, and cutting off supplies to enemy castles. Most fortresses didn't fall through glorious assaults. They fell because defenders were starved into submission. Now, let's talk weapons. On screen, swords dominate the battlefield, shining in every duel. In reality, swords were expensive and often limited to the wealthy. Most soldiers fought with spears, axes, or even farming tools repurposed for war. Combat manuals from the medieval period don't describe elegant duels. They show practical, brutal moves designed to end a fight as quickly as possible. Grab your opponent's arm, T. So the next time you watch a war movie with shining armor, flawless sword play, and noble charges, remember, the truth was far more brutal. Real combat was chaotic, terrifying, and usually decided by fear, logistics, or luck, not by cinematic duels. By understanding the reality of ancient and medieval warfare, we not only see history more clearly, but we also learn to appreciate the true cost of war. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the reality of how soldiers really fought. If this video gave you a new perspective, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more content that uncovers the hidden truths of history.